device to be able to render HTML5 properly. We also have several new widgets, so there are new ways to organize your screen layout and make use of the space, including grid layout, which is by far my favorite because it actually allows you to make screens like this one very easily, where before you would have to use a whole bunch of linear layouts and like play with the constraints and sort of like try to make them work. And grid layout just magically works. So that's one of my favorite ones. Texture view is essentially a way for you to have to render something to a texture, which then becomes part of the view hierarchy. And you also have the switch on the pop-up menu. And there are many others, of course, but we don't have time to go through all of them. Other notable features are Bluetooth health profiles, so you can connect to well, essentially several health-related equipment like bikes, blood pressure monitors, and others. There are several new device sensors, so you can detect ambient temperature and relative humidity. So with the other sensors, you can do a whole bunch of interesting applications with them, such as applications that detect if the user is leaving the atmosphere and things like that, which is very important. Visual voice with that, you can build text-to-speech engines and spell checkers. That's all built into the framework. There were hacky ways to do those before, but now they're official in the API. Some of the best practices that we recommend for ice cream sandwich. First of all, nothing's changed for tablets. So for tablets, you can still use the large X large layout and the new SW qualifiers. So the new SW qualifiers are available all the way from 3.2, and the large X large are available essentially ever since the beginning. And one important thing to notice about tablets is don't assume that API level 11 is a tablet, because that's not true anymore, because of ice cream sandwich. There are some applications that show tablet-like UIs on ice cream sandwich because they assume that. The other important feature is the action bar. So if you're using an API level that's smaller than or equals to 10, you can implement your own or use the compatibility one. And if you're using an API level that's about 10, you can just use the system action bar. But it's very important to have an action bar if that makes sense for your application, of course. Galaxy Nexus is the ice cream sandwich launch device. Our advice is to test your applications on normal XPPI layouts to make sure that it works. I mean, that advice is not needed because your applications already work on every possible screen, right? So, but just in case you have any doubts that your application is going to work on this new screen combination, you can set up your emulator to that screen size and test normal and XHTPI to make sure that it works there. You should enable hardware acceleration because hardware acceleration makes a lot of difference in the new devices. Unless you're targeting API level 14 and above, in which case it's on by default. And you should be careful of the height and width reserved to the for the navigation bar, which is not available to your application, of course. Last thing, let's talk about what's not new, but very important. And what's not new, but very important in Android? Does anyone have a guess? It's users, right? So, do you like users? Does anybody like users? Okay, does anybody hate users? Huh, a lot more hands. Actually, it's statistically known that users cause bugs. I mean, in an experience we conducted, we take an application with 0 users, it has 0 bugs. And then we add users, and suddenly bugs start to appear. So the only scientific explanation is that users cause bugs. But of course, users are very important to us because, I mean, applications with more users are usually more awesome than those that don't. And awesome is a scientific measure, of course. So, it's very important to keep the user happy, so quality is essential. So sometimes we see developers whose philosophy is something like this, you know, my code just works, it's ready to launch. I mean, we're engineers, sometimes we think it's enough for the application just to do what it should. And we just think, yeah, if it's doing what it should, I mean, there's nothing else to do, it's correct, so we just launch. Actually, I've seen worse, I've seen that. So, what we have to emphasize is that quality is crucial and user experience is crucial. So first of all, your application should work as it should. First, it should do what it claims to do. And after that, it's not enough. After that, you have to worry a lot about user experience. So usability, compatibility, and performance. Compatibility is probably one of the key things you have to worry about because Android has diversity at its heart. And diversity is a keyword in Android. You can't think of Android without thinking about diversity. We have several devices, we have several countries, several cultures. So you have to be compatible with them all. We have tablets, we have phones. So if your application is not compatible, if your application excludes certain devices or certain users, they're going to feel left out, they're going to feel angry, because it's like your application is saying, you bought the wrong device for my application. Go back to the store and exchange it. So that's just not a very good user experience, and that's not a way to conquer more and more users. Performance is very important because users are very impatient on mobile devices, even more so than on desktop devices. So you should always think about performance. And that doesn't mean optimizing everything. That means just knowing where to optimize and collect data about where your application should be faster. And concentrate your efforts on the parts that should be faster. After all, there is one famous saying that says that 90% of the time in an application is spent on 10% of the code. So you have to find out which 10% that is instead of trying to optimize everything. If you want to look up more resources related to Android, so this is our one-stop site for all the documentation, so developer.android.com. You can also type dealer.android.com, and these are specifically the platform releases. So I definitely recommend that you read the full platform release because it's long. It takes at least half an hour to read it entirely. So it's not possible to actually condense it into a presentation like this, and there's a lot of cool stuff that we didn't cover here. So that definitely take a look at that. So boring legal stuff that I have to show. And well, if anyone has any questions. All right, go ahead. I think you can just come up to that mic for them.
Hello. Yeah, okay, so I got a question. It's about the action bar. It's split now. So I've been in there, working on Android applications coming from iPhone and comparing them to Android. I've been in valiant fights to the death with people who have all the buttons on the bottom by your thumb. And then I say to them, you can't do that. You've got to go in Android now. You've got to put all the actions in that action bar.
Right.
So now I'm going to go back to them, and then they're going to see this in the new honeycomb. They're going, well, I told you that was better. So why are they now down here? And can you explain the two scenarios? We've got buttons up here, buttons down here, and buttons in the menu. So that's three scenarios. Why? So if we're talking about the user experience and consistency, can you explain the three consistent things that go in all of those occasions in your opinion?
Okay, that's a very good question. When do you use each of the possible positions for the buttons? I mean, you have the action bar, and now we've introduced even more options than before, because you can have the split action bar with buttons at the bottom. Essentially, the guidelines are anytime an action is frequent on your application, it should probably be in the action bar. And anytime an action is less frequent, it should be in the menu. So if you have a menu, it's going to show from the action bar, and you can access that. But when to use, each one depends on, it really depends on a case-by-case basis. It's difficult to make a general rule that's going to work for every application. But in general, you should probably work with a UX designer to figure out what would be the best UI flow for each action on your application. So one of the problems about buttons on the bottom is if your application has a lot of text. So if the user actually has to type something on your application, the buttons at the bottom are going to get in the way of that because the keyboard is going to appear there, the virtual keyboard. So that's one thing to keep in mind. But other than that, it really depends on the application and it's difficult to make a general ruling. But my general advice for this and for many other things related to user experience is talk to a designer or a user experience specialist. And he's going to tell you which flow is best on any particular application. All right, other questions? Everyone who has some question, I mean, the first three get an Android toy like that. So if you can just come up and get yours later. Thank you. All right.
I have two questions. First, about the data limitation. You mentioned that you can limit the data that the app uses. Is this just background data or also front data, like when the app is running in front?
No, it's actually any kind of data that the application uses. So anytime your application consumes any data, that goes into that quota.
So for example, you can block all ads. Basically, if you have a game and you block all data for this game so you cannot show ads anymore,
Right.
Is it true? So the whole monetizing can be blocked?
Yeah, the user could block all data from your game and not let you show ads, essentially. Yes, they could do that. But that's essentially for you, it's the same situation as if the user always play the game in airplane mode.
Okay.
So it's, I mean, there's no practical difference because, I mean, network is something that you should never assume is there all the time. So this is just one of the possibilities in which you're not going to have network on your application. So if ads are very, very important to you and you don't want users playing without showing ads, I mean, you could just say you've been offline for the last 10 times and launched the application, you have to play it online next time. I don't know. I don't know if that's a very good user experience, but that depends on your monetization strategy, of course. But I mean, it's not any different from when there's no network coverage, for instance.
Yeah, but you can disable it like for all, like you don't make money. Yeah, okay, but anyway, I have a second question. I saw something that you have like a time-lapse function built into the ice cream sandwich. Is that right?
Right.
I was wondering if it also is possible to do it the other way around, to do more frames per second, like 60 frames per second. Is that possible? For example, I want to do like 60 frames per second and then play it slower, so I have like a slow motion camera. Is that possible?
Put a lower frame rate on the camera.
No, I want to have like recorded with 60, but then play it with 30, so I have like a slow motion camera. Is that possible?
I see. It probably is. I haven't played a lot with that API.
Okay.
But I'm pretty sure that it should be possible. I mean, you can set the FPS for playback.
Okay, thank you.
Right. I think we have no time for more questions.
Sean?
So, would the two of you please come here to pick up the... Right.